My name is Thomas Ellery, and I have been employed for the past 3 years as the night guard of the Western Antiquities Museum, a building that most residents of the city have either forgotten about or never knew existed in the first place. I am 37 years old, unmarried, with no children, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment that overlooks a dimly lit alleyway 2 blocks from the river. I mention these details not for vanity's sake, but because they explain, in some small way, why I took the job in the first place. Men like me, quiet, unobtrusive, perhaps a little tired of the bustling pace of ordinary life, find comfort in long stretches of silence and the company of objects that cannot speak back. It is a kind of companionship, though a strange one, forged between living man and ancient stone. The Western Antiquities Museum sits on the far edge of town, where the roads are narrow, cracked, and less maintained, and where streetlights grow sparse until darkness itself seems to swallow them. The building is an anachronism, a relic from the late 19th century that had never received the renovations of its peers. From the outside, it appears more like an abandoned courthouse than a museum. Red brick walls streaked with black water stains, windows tall and narrow with heavy frames of wrought iron, and at its highest point, a single clock that has not ticked for decades, its hands forever frozen at 12 minutes past 3. The city council debated for years whether to shut the place down, but arguments about historical value and cultural heritage always managed to preserve it. That, and the simple truth that few people cared enough to notice it was still open. On most days, the museum's only visitors are schoolchildren on field trips and the occasional tourist who mistakes it for a landmark. By dusk, the place empties completely, and it is then, when the last footsteps echo out into the parking lot and the final car taillights vanish into the night, that my shift begins. The position of night guard was described to me as low risk, high patience. The pay was steady, the hours peculiar but manageable, and the responsibilities straightforward. Patrol the halls, make sure the alarms were armed, keep an eye on the security cameras, and above all else, follow the rules. I was told of these rules on my first night by the head curator, a man named Dr. Malcolm Reeve, whose pale complexion and hollow voice gave me the immediate impression of a man who had spent far too much of his life underground. He wore a long gray coat even in the warmth of summer, and when he handed me the small binder that contained the guard regulations, his thin fingers trembled, though not from age. He was only in his 40s. "You'll find everything you need to know here," he said, sliding the binder across his office desk. His eyes did not meet mine but lingered instead on the window behind me, where the night was already thickening. "You must follow every word precisely. There are no exceptions. Failure to comply is dangerous." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. All jobs have their quirks, and many workplaces dress up their manuals with dire warnings that no one truly believes. I had worked at a shipping warehouse before this, and remembered being told that stepping out of the painted safety zone could result in immediate fatal injury. In truth, it usually meant you might stub your toe on a pallet. I assumed this was the same. Still, out of politeness, I nodded and took the binder. The first section contained the standard instructions, I expected schedules, procedures for locking doors, how to handle the alarm system, but tucked into the back was a single page typed in a different font, as though it had been added later, and across the top was written, SPECILRALSNIGHTCFT. There were 12 in total, and though I will not yet recite them all here, I will say they were unlike any professional instructions I had ever seen. They read less like workplace policy and more like superstitions whispered around a campfire. One example, Rule 3, if you hear footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs after midnight, do not investigate, Proceed directly to the security office and wait until the sound ceases. It will not last more than 13 minutes. I admit I chuckled when I read that one. Another warned Rule 7, do not look at your reflection in the central atrium glass after 2 o'clock. If you must pass through, keep your gaze forward and your pace steady. And perhaps the strangest, Rule 10, should you encounter the woman in white on the east staircase, do not speak. She will ask you a question. Whatever it is, you must not answer. Keep walking. When I looked up from the page, expecting Dr. Reeve to smirk or explain that it was all some elaborate joke, I found instead that his face had grown rigid, his eyes dark with something I could not name. You will follow them? He said, his voice quiet but firm. Everyone. I do not exaggerate. I nodded again, though this time with less certainty. That first night, as I sat alone in the security office, watching the rows of grainy camera feeds flicker on the monitors, I thought of those rules again and again. I expected tricks of the eye, maybe rats scurrying across the marble floors, the groan of pipes mistaken for footsteps. Old buildings have a way of sounding alive, even when they are not. Still, I could not shake the unease that had settled into me after Reeves' warning. By 1 in the morning, I found myself walking the halls. The museum's exhibits were dimly lit by small overhead lamps, their beams illuminating sarcophagi, stone tablets, and glass cases filled with ornaments older than entire nations. Shadows clung thick between displays, and my flashlight beam cut through them in narrow slices. The air was colder than outside, though the heating system ran until dawn. It was in the Hall of Pharaohs that I first understood the seriousness of the rules. The hall stretched nearly 100 feet long, lined with statues of Egyptian gods and kings whose eyes seemed to follow every step. The silence was profound, so much so that I could hear the beating of my own heart in my ears. Then, faintly, it came the sound of footsteps. They were distant at first, soft, deliberate, but unmistakable. I froze. My rational mind leapt to explanations. Perhaps another guard, though I was alone. Perhaps the curator, though Reeve had left hours ago. My flashlight beam darted across the polished stone floor, catching nothing but the empty hall ahead. The footsteps grew louder, nearer. My first instinct was to call out, "Hello?" formed on my tongue, but I remembered Rule 3. Do not investigate. Proceed directly to the office. I backed away, pulse racing, until I reached the corridor door. As I turned, I glanced once more toward the shadows. The footsteps had stopped. Back in the office, I sat trembling, my hand tight around the flashlight. 13 minutes, the rule had said. And true enough, exactly 13 minutes later by my watch, the sound returned, fading this time, retreating into silence. That was the first night. I wish I could say it grew easier after that, but in truth, each passing shift only deepened the strangeness. There were other rules that soon became relevant, and each revealed its necessity in due course. The museum was not merely old, nor merely neglected. It was inhabited by something that had no interest in being named, let alone explained. Its presence was woven into the air itself, into the cold stone floors and the glass cases that reflected more than they should. By the end of my first week, I had memorized the rules by heart. By the end of the first month, I no longer laughed at them. The museum had taught me, and the lessons had only begun. The second week of my employment began with an addition to the routine. A collections assistant appeared during the afternoon to leave a crate in the freight corridor and a message for me. Her name was Alina Voss, 20, 9 years old. The collections technician under Dr. Malcolm Reeve. She had pale hair that made her seem younger, and a way of speaking that stacked words like careful boxes. Her note was written on a yellow tag and tied to the crate with twine. Do not open. Do not touch. Do not move. Object intake tomorrow at 9 a.m. Voss. Beneath her writing, In a thinner, older hand, someone had penciled Rule 12 applies. The handwriting was unmistakably Reeves. I set the crate where she left it, corner pressed against the wall, gate locked, and began my shift as usual. But from the moment I sat in the office and watched the freight corridor camera, I felt as though the crate were aware of me. Its wooden slats and customs tape looked too precise, as though they were not containing something but cooperating with it. By 11, the footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs began their appointment. I no longer lingered in the doorway to listen. I retreated immediately, locked the office door, and counted the minutes. This time, though, the footsteps paused early, as if they too were listening for me. When silence returned, I checked the monitors again. Every gallery looked unchanged, statues rooted in shadow. But on the freight corridor feed, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a chalk mark on the lower panel of the crate, faint but deliberate. A door drawn within a door, with a keyhole in the center. The rule warned: if crates knock, obey the pattern. 1 knock is curiosity. 2 knocks, call Voss. 3 knocks, leave at once. I told myself it was nothing. Chalk marks on shipping crates are common. But the longer I stared, the less ordinary it seemed. At 1:06, the office phone rang. A single chime. I did not answer. The brass phone in the East reading room shifted on its table, its receiver twitching like a startled insect. I logged the incident and tried to swallow the rising dryness in my throat. Then came the cold. A sharp, coin-like chill pressed against my upper back, just below the shoulder blades. It lasted 4 breaths before fading. Rule 5 whispered through my mind: if you feel the coin, do not touch it. Stand before the obelisk. Wait. I hadn't moved, and still it had tested me. At 2:08, I passed the atrium. The glass caught me despite my care. My reflection lingered a half second out of sync, its lips parting to shape words I could not hear. I tore my gaze away and forced my pace steady, but guilt clung to me like a second skin. I had broken the rule, however briefly. The punishment followed quickly. In the Mesopotamian gallery, the dish of salt beneath case 4B had crusted over, damp and useless. Across the floor were marks, like hooves, but wrong, angled sideways like dancers' steps. My heart hammered. I scattered new salt, thicker than required, whispering an apology I didn't know who would hear. That was when the woman in white appeared. She waited at the top of the east staircase, veil pale against the dark. I felt the cold perfume before I saw her. Rule 10 demanded silence. She tilted her head toward me, and her voice slid through the air without her mouth moving. Do you remember what you promised? I clenched my teeth, refusing to answer. Her presence swelled, a hunger older than dust. I kept walking, steady, each step counted. When I reached the corridor corner and glanced back, she was gone, leaving only the scorched sweetness of burned sugar in the air. By 3:12, the atrium clock mocked me with its frozen hands. But that night, all the monitors flickered to the Hall of Pharaohs. The statues stood aligned, heads turning toward the camera, and down the center of the hall came a procession. Figures robed in black, masked in gold, each carrying something small and utterly black, objects that swallowed light itself. As they passed, the statues bowed. I could not move. I could not breathe. The feed snapped back to normal an instant later. When Elena arrived the next morning, I told her what I'd seen. She did not doubt me. She only asked, "Did you answer her?" I shook my head. "Good," she said. "So long as you keep silent, you still belong to yourself." Her words chilled me more than the apparitions, because they suggested that the silence was not just survival, it was ownership. And one night, the silence might not be enough. The days outside the museum blurred into trivial noise. The smell of bakeries, the weight of traffic, the mutter of pedestrians. None of it mattered once the heavy iron doors shut behind me at night. What lived in those halls had become my true calendar. Each shift another entry in a journal of rules and warnings. It was during the third month that I began to understand the rules were not independent. They spoke to one another, intersected like veins beneath stone. Breaking one stirred another. I learned this the hard way. The night began with the usual ritual, a nod to the obelisk, a whispered greeting so low I barely believed I'd spoken aloud. Its surface gleamed faintly under the gallery lights, inscriptions burning with a patience that outlived kings. My shift passed quietly until the footsteps began again in the Hall of Pharaohs. They usually lasted 13 minutes, fading into silence like a tide retreating. This night, the pattern fractured. 9 minutes in, while I stood in the office listening, the sound stopped abruptly. I looked at the monitors, expecting emptiness. Instead, every feed showed black for 3 heartbeats, then returned. On the corridor camera, the crate waited. The chalk doors glimmered faintly, lines thicker than before. The keyhole darker, almost as if ink had soaked into the wood. I leaned closer, my breath misting the glass of the monitor. That was when the knock came. 1. The sound vibrated through the office, not through the speaker but through the air itself. 2. My stomach dropped. The rule was clear after 2 knocks, call Voss. My hand hovered over the phone, trembling. But before I could dial, a 3rd knock slammed the crate, loud enough that dust shook loose from the camera lens. 3. I froze. The instructions were absolute. 3 knocks meant no one. I couldn't call her. I couldn't open it. I could only leave it. The silence after was worse than the knocks themselves. The crate sat in place, still and ordinary, yet the air around me buzzed with the feeling of something listening, waiting to see if I'd break. I forced myself to log the incident. Though my handwriting came out jagged, I stared at the page so long I nearly missed the next rule awakening. At 2 o'clock, patrolling the atrium, I caught my reflection again. Not by choice, just the natural betrayal of glass. The figure in the pane lagged half a beat behind my stride. Its eyes glowed faintly, its mouth stretching into a smile that showed too many teeth. I broke the rule. I looked, and the reflection mouthed words, "Let me in." I staggered forward, tearing my gaze away, but the punishment came swift. In the Mesopotamian gallery, the salt beneath case 4B was gone. Not crusted, not spilled, gone as though something had licked it from the dish. Hoofprints angled sideways across the stone, vanishing beneath the shadow of a broken tablet. I knelt, fumbling salt from the pouch, whispering an apology under my breath. The air chilled. The perfume arrived. She was waiting at the east staircase. The woman in white. Her veil drifted though no wind stirred. She watched me without eyes, her face blurred beneath fabric. And then her voice filled the gallery, smooth as poured water. "Do you think you are the only one watching?" I clenched my jaw, counting numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rule, do not speak. She took a step closer. He watches too. The one in the glass. He is patient. My heart thrashed. I kept walking steady, refusing to answer. Her perfume followed me, burning sweet, until I turned the corridor and she was gone. At 3:12, the atrium clock mocked me with its frozen hands. Every monitor shifted to a single feed, the Hall of Pharaohs. The statues stood aligned, but they were no longer still. They had bowed, their heads angled toward a procession moving down the hall. Figures in black robes, faces hidden behind golden masks, carried small objects clutched close to their chests. Things darker than shadow, things that devoured light. Step by step, they passed the statues, and with each figure, another statue bent its head. I could not breathe. The feed flickered, then blinked away, returning to empty stone. I sat trembling in the office chair, unable to write, unable even to blink. The silence afterward felt heavier than sound. When Elena arrived in the morning, I told her. I described the knock, The reflection, the woman, the procession. She listened, eyes sharp, her clipboard forgotten at her side. "Did you answer her?" she asked at last. "No," I whispered. She nodded once. "Good. As long as you keep silent, you still belong to yourself." Her words struck harder than any apparition. Because silence, I realized, was not just survival. Silence was ownership. And the museum wanted ownership above all. Morning sunlight had never looked more fragile. When Elena left with the crate, I walked out into the waking city. But every sight felt counterfeit. Cars moved. People bought bread. Children shouted near the river. Yet all of it seemed staged, as if the world outside was only a backdrop painted to distract me from the building I'd left behind. By evening, when I returned, the museum welcomed me with its familiar hush. The air tasted of stone and varnished wood, colder than the humid streets. Locking the heavy doors behind me felt less like securing the museum and more like sealing myself inside a coffin. I followed the routine. Lights checked. Alarms tested. Binder of rules set on the desk. Greeting to the obelisk spoken softly in the Near East gallery. Each act soothed me, though I knew soothing was only bait. But something had shifted since the night of the 3 knocks. I felt it from the first step down the corridor. The museum was not merely watching me anymore. It was waiting. The shift began with silence too deep, as if the whole building had inhaled and would never exhale. On the monitors, the galleries glowed faintly, empty but not lifeless. I told myself the rules were protection. I clung to them the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. At 11:30, the footsteps began in the hall of Pharaohs. The rhythm was wrong. They did not echo in the steady pace I knew. Instead, they stumbled, hesitated, then resumed, like someone limping. I backed into the office, counting the seconds. But 13 minutes passed, and the sound did not fade. The binder warned of this possibility in a margin note. If the pattern breaks, remain still. Do not enter the hall. Do not attempt to help. I sat frozen. The footsteps dragged on uneven for 23 minutes before silence returned. My body shook with the effort of not moving. I wrote the entry in the log, hand cramped. But when I looked at the words, I saw another hand had already written over mine. A faint second script threaded between my letters, curling and delicate. It read, "You cannot follow forever." The pen dropped from my fingers. At 1 o'clock, the brass phone in the East reading room rang once. I ignored it. At 1:02 it rang again, twice this time. I strained to hear. "Thomas." The voice was mine. Not an imitation. Not a distortion. My own voice exact, calling from the receiver. "Thomas, I know you can hear me." My stomach twisted. The rule said I could answer if I recognized the voice that called my name. But what did it mean when the voice was mine? Did the museum intend for me to collapse into myself, to pick up and speak to the echo? I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking in the chair until the rings died. When I looked at the monitors again, every feed had changed. Each gallery showed me. Dozens of me, walking the halls, patrolling. Some versions carried flashlights, some bled from their foreheads. Some stared directly at the camera, mouths moving in silent words. I shoved the binder open, desperate for instruction, but there was no rule for this. Only a warning scrawled in old ink near the back. If you see yourself, do not ask which one you are. The screens blinked back to normal. My reflection in the monitors was only mine again. But the question lingered like rot. Had I been the one in the office, or one of the others walking? By 2 o'clock, exhaustion dragged at me. I forced myself to patrol the atrium. The glass walls gleamed, reflecting faint light from the skylight. I kept my gaze forward, lips muttering the numbers 1 through 4. Then I heard it, the woman's voice, faint, slipping from behind the glass. "Answer me." I didn't look. I didn't break stride. But the glass pulsed with movement at the corner of my vision. my reflection clawing at the barrier, mouth distended in a scream I could not hear. I stumbled through, gasping, and found myself back in the Mesopotamian gallery. The salt beneath case 4B had cracked again. This time, words had been written in the residuo pen. I recoiled, nearly dropping the pouch of salt in my hands. With shaking fingers, I scattered a fresh circle, thicker than ever before. The word vanished as the granules touched the floor. At 3:12, the museum revealed its cruelty. The monitors shifted to the Hall of Pharaohs once more. The procession returned, robed figures masked in gold. But this time, one carried something I recognized, the crate. Its chalk doors glowed bright as fire, the keyhole open and black. They marched in silence, their heads bowed, and behind them, something moved within the crate. Something that pressed against the slats, stretching them outward like ribs straining against skin. I watched, paralyzed. The figures vanished into shadow, the feed cut, and then, in the office itself, the knock came. 1, the desk shook. 2, the monitors flickered. 3, the binder slid from the desk and hit the floor with a heavy thud. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body locked in terror as the sound echoed through the office, as though the crate itself had appeared beside me. Then silence. The monitors steadied. The room calmed. But I could feel it. Something was different now. The rule had been obeyed, but something had crossed regardless. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside with legs that barely held me. Alina met me at the freight entrance, clipboard in hand. Her face tightened when she saw me. "You heard 3 knocks," she said flatly. I nodded. She sighed, almost mournful. "Then it's begun." Her words chased me into the daylight, heavier than any shadow. Morning made Elena honest. In the freight corridor, where the lights hum low and the concrete remembers dust, she leaned her hip against the dolly and said, without any of the museum's careful euphemism, "The rules aren't to protect you. Not first. They're to keep the building from finishing a sentence. It started before any of us were born." I asked what sentence, and she looked at the crate instead of me. "Ownership," she said. "It wants names the way a fire wants air. 3 knocks means it has learned the rhythm of a name and is testing for an answer." "It knocked here," I said, touching my chest. "In the office, not in the corridor. That means it can smell you now." She didn't try to soften it. "Well, tighten the perimeters tonight." She drew a thin envelope from her clipboard and slid it to me. Inside lay a scrap of onion paper, yellowed and crisp, carbon typed in a different font than the binder. At the top, Rule 0. Keep your name intact. Use the full name you first gave the building. Do not accept diminutives. Do not let it rename you. Do not sign a name you do not speak aloud first. "Where was this?" I asked. "Under the desk pad since Reeve." She stared at the envelope as if it owed her an apology. "He doesn't like to admit there's a rule you can't enforce with a checklist." "What exactly has begun?" I asked. "Threads pulling taut," she said. "You'll feel them tonight." I slept for 3 hours and dreamed I was walking through galleries that would not hold still. Walls turned into narrow streets. Cases turned into shop windows. The obelisk became a lighthouse whose beam found only me. Woke with salt on my tongue and the word "O pen" scraped raw in my throat. By dusk, the city had the look of a stage reset between scenes. I let myself in, locked the iron doors, and performed the small ceremonies that pretend to be enough. Lights, alarms, the obelisk's greeting spoken plainly, the binder on the desk and Rule 0 copied onto the inside cover in my own hand, neat as a pledge. Nothing moved. Nothing called. That was worse than the footsteps. At 11:11, my watch insisted on the mirroring. The cameras blinked in sequence. Not blackouts, not glitches. A slow, deliberate eyelid of the entire building. When they opened again, The freight corridor showed the crate with its chalk doors unchanged. Only the keyhole had acquired a shine like wet stone. I wondered whether chalk can grow glossy. I wondered whether questions need polish. The footsteps began at 11:19 and arrived limping, as they had the night before, a drag and a step, as if a fifth invisible rule waited just to trip them. I stayed in the office. The sound tried shapes in the corridor outside, stopped, started, reversed for 6 beats, then retreated, more annoyed than violent. I wrote the time, the pattern, the breath count. When I looked down to check what I'd written, someone had threaded a second script through my letters again. So faint you could ignore it if you wanted to. You cannot follow forever. I put my palm flat on the page and spoke my name, first and last, and the date I first took the keys. Rule 0 felt like a small door that could close quickly if you held it with the right tone. The paper warmed, the ghost hand withdrew. I did not write that part in the log. At 1:03, the red wall phone gave a single click like a tongue against the roof of the mouth. Then Pipes took a breath behind the plaster and began to swallow. That sound always suggests the building has found a river beneath itself and is drinking. I stood in the freight corridor with the gate between me and the phone and told myself fax iron, concrete, fluorescent hum, tape square holding true around the crate's feet. The chalk doors seemed to lean toward me without moving. I said a plain sentence to them, not mine, and returned to the office with the sentence still whole. At 1:40 the coin returned to my spine, colder, heavier, as if it had learned weight. I stood, walked to the obelisk, faced north, and waited the long minute. It did not leave. The rule says to call the number under the telephone if it remains. I lifted the desk phone and tilted it. Taped there in brittle cellophane was a handwritten number I had never dialed. I called. A man answered on the second ring without hello. State your name, employment, and hire date. He said. The voice was dry, impatient English with a Midlands scrape under it. I did as told. He made a small approving noise that did not sound like comfort.
Say balance once,
he said. Do not move. Balance, I said. The coin grew hot enough to sting. I did not reach for it. He waited through my hissed breath and said, Good. When it cools, you will owe the building a fact you do not barter. Speak a single true thing in a room where it can hear you, and do not ask for payment. That will reconcile the ledger you just opened. Who is this? I asked. He ignored the question. Do not call again unless the coin returns and the heat stays too long. It is only for that. It is not a comfort line.
do you understand? Wes! Good!
He said. We'll want you to last. The line died. I stood with my forehead against cold stone while the obelisk hummed like restrained weather. The coin cooled and then was gone. In the reading room, where the brass phone likes to play, I paid the ledger. I have a brother named Matthew, and we have not spoken for 11 years. The room tasted briefly of metal the way blood does. Nothing else happened. That is how the building says we've heard you. At 2, I took the long way to avoid the atrium's glass, and still caught myself in a reflection anyway. A faint ghost in the varnish of a case, a pale face in the sheen of a tablet. The knot, me in the gloss, gave me a look of rueful sympathy, which was almost worse than malice. It mouthed something with 2 syllables. It could have been Thomas or promise. I didn't try to learn which. Rule 0 sat warm over my heart like a thin shield. The woman in white waited on the landing. I felt her before I saw her, the camphor perfume. The cellar cool, the quiet gladly worn for decades. She stepped down one stair and lifted her veil enough to show an outline of a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. The words arrived not in my ear, but in the little vault behind my eyes. Do you remember what you promised? I walked as if she were only air. I kept the numbers gentle. 1, 2, 3, 4, like a child skipping rope in a playground that does not exist anymore. Something in the air pouted like a shut door, and then the cold lifted. In the second-floor corridor, the heat came back, not from vents, but from the coin placed between my shoulders, as if whatever had pressed the coin admired my refusal and wanted me to reconsider. I did not. At 2:38, the brass phone rang twice and used my voice again. "Thomas," it said. "Thomas, are we awake yet?" I picked up the receiver and set it down without bringing it to my ear. Answering without listening is a trick I did not know I knew. The monitor bank held steady until 3:05. Then each camera rolled over, like sleepers turning toward a dream they prefer. All feeds showed the Hall of Pharaohs in an old, grainy monochrome, bowing statues, long shadows. The central aisle a pale rib of stone. The procession entered from the far end. I counted 9 figures in black robes and gold masks. The 10th carried the crate. The chalk doors shone like polished bone. The keyhole was not a hole anymore, but a black coin sunk into the wood. Halfway down the hall, the carrier stopped and set the crate on the floor. The 9 turned to face it and lifted their hands, not in prayer but in a counting of fingers. 1, 2, 3. The crate shook. Something inside pressed outward, and the slats bent as if the wood had suddenly learned to breathe. The 9 did not help. They did not move. They were only a clock with hands of flesh. The feed cut to the office camera for a single heartbeat. The empty chair. The binder on the desk. Then the wall to my left sounded like a door being knocked from inside the bricks. 1, 2, 3. Rule 12 says leave. So I left, out of the office, not toward the knock. Not toward the freight corridor. The museum has a talent for hurting, but the binder had taught me how to spill out of its hands, move diagonally. Do not walk straight where it expects. Climb one stair and go down another. I made a crosshatch of corridors and arrived in the Near East Gallery, with no memory of choosing a route. Alina was there. She should not have been. It was not dawn. She wore no blue gloves. In her left hand she held a brass bowl filled with sand the color of old ink. In her right, a spool of red thread. "Emergency protocol," she said. "Help me string the atrium. We'll break the horizon." We tied the thread low, ankle height. Across the mouth of the atrium, 3 lines making a child's game of tripwires. She scattered the black sand along the baseboards in shapes I recognized from labels. Cartouches and eyes and teeth, drawn as if she were writing a sentence in a language the building could read. In front of the freight corridor gate, she laid the bowl of sand and pressed her thumb to it. When she lifted her thumb, a print remained, whorled and singular. "What does it do?" I asked. "It reminds the building whose hands are here," she said. "It forgets, or pretends to." She produced a rectangle of cotton paper and a glass pen. "Write your name in full," she said. "First, middle if you have it, last. Write it once. Do not adorn it. Do not try to make it beautiful." I wrote like a first grader, blocky and careful. She read it, nodded, and slid the paper under the bowl. "Now it can prefer not to eat you. Sometimes that's the difference between a wound and a scar." "Who answered the obelisk number?" I asked. "Aldous Wynn." "Most likely," she said, the name flowing into the air like a note. "Guard from the 1920s. The number reaches whoever is on consolation duty. I take Tuesdays. He takes nights when the coin holds. He died in 1947. He's very good at policies." "You said the rules keep it from finishing a sentence," I said. "What is the sentence inside the crate?" She swallowed before answering, as if the answer might abrade. "A question. Some tombs were built not to house bodies, but to house questions. This one asks the same thing in 1,000 dialects. Who do you belong to? It cannot force an answer. It can only arrange your choices. The rules give you other choices to make in the meantime. And if someone answers, it owns the answer, she said. If you say your mother, it wears her voice. If you say no one, it wears that vacancy and becomes your echo. If you say the museum, she did not finish the thought. She did not need to. The red thread hummed without moving, like a plucked string. In the atrium glass, where the reflection usually lurked, there was nothing at all now. No me, no corridor, no skylight, only a flat black like an unlit window at night. If I can't see myself, how do I know I'm here? I asked, and meant it as a joke until the last word. You're here, she said, brisk again. Help me with the salt at 4B. The dish was clean when we reached it, as if a scolded animal had made the bed it had torn. We poured a new surface and smoothed it with the flat of a brass rule. The hoof angles did not return. I wanted to believe in the simplicity of cause and effect. I let myself have 1 minute of that belief, like a warm hand around a cold mug. At 3:12, the clock in the atrium pretended to be what it always pretends, and the building pretended to be only itself, and still the 3 knocks ran like a current under both lies. They came from nowhere this time, which is to say from everywhere. So even Alina heard them and went a little gray. Do not call me if it knocks 3 times, she said, repeating her day note now that the night could bite it. If you call, it will answer as me and make you say the thing you keep in your mouth like a coin. I already gave it a fact, I said. The ledger. She shook her head. That was payment. It still wants your answer. We stood together in the freight corridor while the red phone pretended sleep and the bowl of sand pretended to be only a bowl. The chalk doors had multiplied. There had always been a door inside a door. Now there were 3, nested, the smallest no bigger than a thumbnail, and the keyhole had become a bead sound into the wood, black and glossy, threadless and perfect. Tomorrow, Elena said, keeping her voice soft so the corridor would not feel challenged. We moved the crate to the lab. 2 names must be present for intake, mine and yours. We inventory questions like any other object. We put them on a shelf and feed them their rules. If only one of us is present, the smallest door opens. If it opens, it will step into the space we leave in our sentences. What about Reeve? I asked. He will either be here, or he will do what he has been doing, avoiding the hours he taught you to fear. She allowed herself a small, bitter smile. He thinks the rules make him immune. They make him useful. In the office again, the monitors showed nothing but rooms being rooms. The binder lay open where it had fallen during the knocks. I righted it. Rule 10's margin note had changed. It used to read, "She will ask you a question. Whatever it is, you must not answer." Now, in the thin, slanted hand I had learned to recognize as not quite Reeves, there was an addition. If she asks you to remember, do not try. Memory is an answer. I closed the binder without logging my fear. The red thread across the atrium looked absurd and childish on the camera. It also made the camera flicker whenever the line crossed the frame, an optical glitch that felt like a nod from the building. You have drawn on me, I will draw on you. When the first bruise of dawn pushed at the skylights, Elena pressed her palm to the crate's side, very lightly, as you might touch a sleeping animal to check its breath. It knows your heartbeat, she said. That isn't a disaster. It makes you real. Things that don't know you exist can still invent you. Better to be real. Is that what we're doing? I asked. Choosing the better way to be eaten. We're choosing how much of ourselves we keep, she said. That is the definition of a shift. We walked the long way to the staff door to avoid the woman's staircase, not from fear but from thrift. I felt the building watching us spend ourselves. Outside, the river carried broken light toward a sun that had not yet shown its face. Alana stopped with her hand on the exit bar and said, still looking ahead, "Bring your name tomorrow written again, and bring a question you will not answer. Put both in your pocket. The first will anchor you. The second will make the crate jealous." "What question?" I asked. "Any that matters," she said. "Just don't tell it to me." She left through the door into day. I stood another minute in the revolving dark, feeling the threads inside the museum slacken for the sleep that isn't sleep. In the reading room behind me, the brass phone rang 3 times. I did not turn. I unhooked the line from the cradle, set the handset face down with care, and walked away without speaking. The museum approved, quietly, the way a cat approves by not leaving the room. On the desk, in the logbook that had learned my hand too well, a new line had appeared in neat block letters I couldn't disentangle. Balance paid. Inquiry pending. I went home with my name in my pocket twice, and a question in my mouth I would not say. I walked past the bakery and did not look in. I slept 1 hour and dreamed of the obelisk's shadow standing in a boat, ferrying itself across a narrow river without paying the man who held the pole. When I woke, someone had knocked once on the wall beside my bed. It was my wall. It did not matter. I sat up in the dark and said my name until it sounded like a key turning and a bolt drawing back and a door deciding to stay closed. When night fell again, the iron doors of the museum took me in with their usual patient appetite. I greeted the obelisk. I tested the alarms. I laid the second name, paper under the bowl of black sand, and felt the room make space for me, as if I were a chair it had forgotten to set. At 11, the footsteps resumed their limp. At 1, the coin tried my back and failed to stick. At 2, the atrium glass was only a blank where my reflection might have been, and the red thread hummed like a low hymn sung under breath. At 3:12, nothing happened, which was the worst cruelty yet, because it made me wonder. And wondering is a question I almost answered. Before dawn, when the freight door's locks still looked like a language you could learn if you tried, the crate knocked once, softly, like a shy guest. Elena arrived with her clipboard and her blue gloves. We moved it together onto the dolly. We did not speak to it, and it did not pretend to be grateful. In the lab, beneath bright clean lights that make even dust behave, she handed me the form her hand had memorized and said, "Speak your name." I did. She spoke hers. Somewhere inside the crate, wood twisted with the tiny sigh of something deciding to bide its time. We did not open. We did not look for the edges of the smallest chalk door. We wrote what we needed to write. We set the crate on a shelf like any other dangerous sentence wrapped in paper. We left the lab together. Behind us, in letters no piece of chalk could have made, a 4th door drew itself inside the 3rd. The keyhole stayed the same size. That is how you know you are not done. Elena looked at me with a tenderness that had nothing to do with pity and said, "Tomorrow, we begin to teach it your refusal." She meant we will make a new rule. I nodded as if learning to refuse could be learned like measuring a case or logging a temperature. Outside, the city unrolled its painted backdrop again, and for a few steps, I believed in sidewalks. Then the museum's shadow crossed the street, long fingers in daylight, and I remembered what I'd promised myself my name. Once, in full, my question. Kept my mouth closed. The 6th month of my employment arrived like a bruise that never faded. By then the rules had ceased to feel like guidelines and more like ribs, keeping something vast from collapsing inward on me. I had learned to breathe between them, to measure my life not in days, but in the narrow spaces between prohibitions. But the rules had begun to shift. They were no longer only instructions to me. They were instructions to the building, too. Reminders, restraints, compromises. And compromises never last. The night after Elena and I shelved the crate, the museum's silence changed. It was not empty silence anymore. It was listening silence, the kind you hear when someone presses their ear to the other side of a door. At 11, the footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs failed to arrive. Instead, the monitors showed statues turned fully toward the camera, all heads bowed in the same direction toward the lab where we had locked the crate. At 1 o'clock, the red wall phone rang once, then twice, then once again, a broken rhythm. The binder had no rule for that pattern. I refused to answer, though the ringing clawed at my teeth like static. At 2, the atrium reflection returned. This time I kept my eyes forward. But in the corner of my vision, my reflection did not copy me. It walked away, striding confidently in another direction, vanishing into the glass. And at 3:12, the monitors blanked. Every feed went black, save one, the crate. Its chalk doors had multiplied again. 4, nested inside one another, the smallest now no bigger than a fingernail. The keyhole glowed faintly, pulsing with each beat of my own heart. I knew it was my heartbeat because the timing was exact. Then the knocks came. 1, 3, 4. The fourth echoed through the entire building, rattling frames, shaking dust from ceilings. There was no rule for 4 knocks. The binder lay open on the desk, useless. The rules had reached their limit. And then came the voice. It did not come from the crate. It came from everywhere. The air, the stone, the glass, even from inside my own scalpel. Who do you belong to? The question was so simple, so soft. Yet my mouth opened against my will, desperate to answer. I clamped my jaw shut, whispering the numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. But the question pressed harder, the syllables curling under my ribs, digging at my lungs. Who do you belong to? The woman in white appeared on the east staircase, veil trembling. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was the same question made flesh. I fled into the near east gallery, stumbling toward the obelisk. Its inscriptions gleamed with pale fire, as though lit from within. I pressed my palms to its surface, whispered my name, my full name again and again. Thomas Ellery, Thomas Ellery, Thomas Ellery. The pressure inside me loosened just slightly. The question faltered on me. Footsteps dragged, the limp pattern from nights past. They circled me unseen. The woman's perfume thickened, acrid and cloying. The obelisk pulsed once, twice. Then it spoke, not in words but in a vibration deep in my bones. A warning, a choice. Rule 0 had told me, keep your name intact. The obelisk added, keep your silence intact. The fourth knock resounded again, this time from the office itself. The monitors flickered, and then, impossibly, the office door opened on its own. I saw myself standing there. Another Thomas. He was thinner, paler, with eyes sunk deep, as though he had not slept in years. His lips curved into that same phosphorescent smile I had seen in the glass. He raised his hand, beckoning. You can stop now, he said in my exact voice. Let me in. I'll take the shift. Every instinct screamed to answer, to give in, to rest. But silence is ownership. Silence is refusal. I turned from him, pressed my forehead to the obelisk, and whispered the question Elena had told me to keep in my pocket. The question I would never answer. It burned in my throat, raw and wordless. The obelisk absorbed it, inscriptions flaring white. The air cracked. The knock stopped. The other Thomas vanished. When I turned back, the woman in white was gone. The perfume had lifted. The building's silence returned. Not listening silence, but the old silence, heavy but bearable. The crate remained on the lab shelf. Its chalk doors still gleamed, 4 nested inside one another. But the keyhole had dimmed. For now, at dawn, Elena found me collapsed in the corridor, binder clutched to my chest. She knelt, checked my pulse, and when she saw my eyes open, she nodded. You refused? She said simply. I don't know how much longer I can. She placed her hand on my shoulder, firm. That's the truth of the job. None of us can forever. The rules buy us time. Sometimes time is enough. Her words did not comfort me. They condemned me. Because the museum is patient. The crate is patient. The question will wait. And one night, perhaps not soon, perhaps years from now, when exhaustion has worn me thin and silence has become too heavy to carry, I will answer. And when I do, the museum will own me.